It's called fiscal consolidation, fiscal adjustment. There are all of these euphemisms for it, but basically it's raising taxes and cutting spending.
Back when El Salvador was still in conversations with the IMF, one of the IMF's conditions for El Salvador was that they go on a program of that type of fiscal austerity. But then those negotiations with the IMF fell through, and it doesn't seem likely that El Salvador gets access to that kind of funding from the IMF anytime soon.
There's a reason that I think El Salvador or other countries would be opposed to that kind of deal. I mean, look, we're facing a recession right now, and telling people, hey, start taxing your citizens more and cut all of your spending. That's generally not something you want to do under these circumstances, right?
What you're saying is, wouldn't that be a textbook case of pro-cyclical fiscal policy? Like, aren't you just making things worse at a time when you really can't afford to? I think that's a valid criticism. There's merit to that idea, but in the specific case of El Salvador, they widened the fiscal deficit substantially in the coronavirus pandemic, which I think was merited, but they haven't scaled back. Like, the pandemic is largely over, like people have been vaccinated. The variants that are coming in now are not as dangerous as they used to be. So there's no reason to keep having such an enormous fiscal deficit. In fact, it's like time to rein in the spending, like the emergency is over. So sure, like the costs of a fiscal adjustment program right now are significant, but the costs of not adjusting are also significant. Like, it means that you're going to run into a chaotic debt default.
Do you think Bitcoin has played a role?
In an obvious sense, yes, and in a less obvious sense, also yes. The obvious thing is, like, the Bitcoin rollout cost a bunch of money. I've seen different numbers here and there, but there's one article from El Faro, the local paper, that tallies all of the expenses as like $375 million between all in with everything. I don't know if that number is high. And then there are also the $50 million of unrealized losses on the president's alleged portfolio of Bitcoin investments. So that's $425 million. So that's like 1.5 percentage points of GDP. So that's a lot of money.
Is there still no proof that he's purchased any Bitcoin?
I don't know. So all I've seen is the tweets.
That's fucking insane.
So those are the known expenses. Then there are the sort of difficult to measure but equally real expenditures, which are that the Bitcoin implementation alienated the IMF. In these kinds of situations of macro fiscal distress, they can be an important ally for two reasons. One, they loan you a bunch of money at a low interest rate. And the other thing that they do is that because you have a program that's sponsored by the International Monetary Fund, that gives financial markets a lot of confidence. So that makes your spreads in bond markets come down, and it makes it cheaper to borrow from international financial markets if and when you're able to do so again. So alienating the IMF really has big costs. I know that the IMF's very politicized. People love to hate the IMF. I was a development economist for 5 years. And what is the IMF? The IMF is the doctor that shows up when the patient is laying on the bed with all kinds of symptoms, very sick, and they do very nasty treatment that also hurts to try and fix you, to try and save you. So it's easy to hate on the doctor. But the reason why the doctor is there is because the country, had poor macro fiscal management for all these years and put itself in that position. There are a bunch of, emerging market countries, developing countries that they don't even talk to the IMF because they don't need to, because, their macro fiscal house is perfectly in order.